This happened quite a few years back when I was still in undergrad. I think I must have been around 19 or 20 at the time, and it was during December finals week. One of those weird evenings where everything feels a bit off kilter, just because the campus starts emptying out. I remember it was a Friday night, not super late, probably just before 10 p.m., and the study building I was in was still open 24/7 for finals, but most students had already called it a night. The parking lot outside had that eerie kind of quiet you don't normally experience unless it's the dead of summer or winter break. Almost no cars around, barely any movement. Now this parking lot was huge, split into 3 sections thanks to the weird way the land was shaped. The bottom section sat closest to the campus buildings. Then there was the middle area slightly higher up. And finally the top level ran parallel to the road, kind of narrow with only a couple rows of spaces. That night I was parked all the way at the top. Late arrival, finals week, you know how it goes. And that meant I had to make the whole walk back from the study building alone, through all 3 tiers of the lot. As I left the building, I started making my way through the lower lot when a black car, looked like a Civic, pulled in and drove slowly all the way down toward the section I was in. My first thought was that it might be my friend who lived nearby, because he had the same model car and would sometimes come to study late too. The driver pulled into a space right across from me and turned off the engine, and I figured I'd glance over to say hey once they got out. Except when I looked over, it wasn't my friend. Whoever stepped out was tall and thin, dressed entirely in black, and I couldn't make out their face in the dark. I didn't think much of it at first, just figured someone else had business on campus, though it seemed unlikely at that time of night. I kept walking, but not even a minute later, I checked behind me and saw the same person trailing along in the same direction, toward the middle and upper lots, where no campus buildings were. That gave me a weird feeling, because nobody heads up that way unless their car's parked up there, and with how empty it was, it just didn't make sense. I picked up my pace and tried to stay calm, but my phone had died earlier in the study building, and I was basically on my own. Once I hit the second level of the lot, I noticed a little blue Beetle parked off to one side, and just beyond that, my car finally came into view. But then something else made me stop in my tracks for a second. Right in front of my car, under one of those glaring white street lamps, there was another guy. He was pacing slowly, almost like he was waiting for someone. He stood out immediately because he was dressed head to toe in white, and he had dreads. The way he stood right in front of my hood made it impossible to get to the car without passing by him. Now at this point, I'm freaking out internally. There's one guy following me, and now another standing right where I need to go. It felt like a trap, like I just walked into something planned out. But what choice did I have? I kept walking, half hoping the guy in white wouldn't say or do anything, just praying I could reach the car and lock the doors before either of them made a move. Then something happened that completely threw me. As I was passing by the blue Beetle and closing in on my car, I glanced back and noticed the man in black had stopped walking. He was just standing there awkwardly near the Beetle, pretending to look at it, like trying to come up with a reason to be there. Then, without warning, he turned around and started heading back in the direction he came from. That shift in behavior was so bizarre and sudden that it didn't even fully register until I was already unlocking my door and sliding into my seat. The guy in white never spoke, never approached me. He just kept pacing, smoking his cigarette under that streetlight, as I started my engine and turned on the wipers to clear off the frost. But because I was parked up top, I had a clear view of the whole lot below. And that's when I saw the black Civic again. Its headlights were back on, engine running, and I realized the other guy had gotten into it. He was leaving now. It's hard to describe the rush of dread and relief I felt at once. This guy shows up on campus late at night for no reason, doesn't even go into a building, follows me halfway across an empty lot, then just bails the second another man shows up near my car. That wasn't a coincidence. The only reason he turned around was because he didn't want to deal with the man in white. As I left the lot, the Civic followed behind me for a bit. It stayed on my tail through the dark back road leading out of campus and part of the way through town, until I finally lost it somewhere in traffic. I kept checking my mirrors the whole drive home, terrified that it would pop back up, but it never did. When I got home and actually had time to process everything, it hit me just how weird the whole scene had been. The guy in black, creeping behind me. The guy in white, standing alone under the light, completely silent but somehow, whether intentionally or not, keeping me safe. The contrast between the two, the black outfit, the white outfit, ended up sticking in my head way longer than the event itself. It almost felt symbolic, which is something I usually roll my eyes at, but in this case, I don't know, man. It's hard to explain. I've told this story to people close to me, and most just kind of shrug and say it probably wasn't that serious. Maybe the guy just needed directions or something. But I knew in my gut that if that man in white hadn't been there, something awful might have happened. Whether he was just smoking there by chance or had some other reason for being there, I owe him. Big time. Back in 2020 or 2021, honestly can't remember which thanks to how weird those lockdown years were, I had this one shift that still sticks in my head. I was working at a burger joint inside this massive shopping center in Sydney, and I used to close up pretty late. It was just part of the job, and most nights I'd be the last one out, locking up after everyone else had already left. I didn't mind it much back then, not until this particular night anyway. Because of where staff were allowed to park, I always had to walk up a few levels to get to the car. 8 floors up to be exact, since staff parking was tucked up on the rooftop. To get there, I had to take this maze of escalators. They were set up in this zigzag formation, like one going up, a short landing, and then another set, repeating all the way to the top. You'd go up one, turn, go up another, and so on. Each landing had doors that led out to different levels of the center, or into parking zones for shoppers. But that top level was for employees only, and it was gated off unless your plate was registered. Now, on this particular night, I finished later than usual, close to midnight, I think, and the place was completely dead. COVID restrictions were still in effect, so most of the center was closed off. No customers, no cleaning staff, no one except a couple of security guards who stuck to the ground floor. I was used to walking through the place alone, and that was never really a problem until that night. As I was heading out toward the escalators, I heard footsteps behind me. At first I didn't think anything of it, but then I realized there were 2 guys trailing behind me. Not right on my heels, but definitely close enough to make me notice. They looked around my age, maybe a bit older, mid-20s or so. The way they kept talking in low voices made me uncomfortable. I couldn't make out what they were saying, and their presence just felt wrong, like they weren't there by accident. I've always been small, barely 5 feet tall, so I've gotten into the habit of being hyper-aware in situations like this. That night I pulled out my phone and started tapping on it, pretending to be deep in a text conversation, even though I knew nobody I knew would be awake. It was more for show than anything else, just in case they were watching me. When I got to the escalators, I stepped onto the first one and glanced back. One of the guys kept walking straight past like he had somewhere else to be. But the other one? He got on the escalator right behind me. That immediately made me nervous. I kept thinking maybe he'd exit on the next landing. There were plenty of places he could have gone. But he didn't. Every time I got off one escalator and stepped onto the next, I could hear him behind me, not speeding up, not slowing down, just following. That's when I started walking faster. Not full-on running, but definitely not just riding the escalator anymore. I wanted space between us. I didn't stop to rest on the landings. I just kept going, climbing each one like my legs were on autopilot. I was so focused on getting to the top that I almost missed the moment he stopped. Right as I got to the last or second to last level, I paused and looked back. He hadn't followed me onto the next escalator. Instead, he was just standing there on the landing, peering around like he was trying to figure out where I'd gone. He didn't look confused like someone who forgot where they parked. He looked like someone searching for someone else. I caught a glimpse of him through the reflection on one of the glass doors that led out to the car park. After a few seconds of scanning the area, he turned around and headed back down. I kept climbing until I reached my level and made it to my car, keeping an eye over my shoulder the whole time. I sat there for a minute once I locked the door, just trying to make sense of what happened. The whole thing didn't feel random. The way the two of them had split up, the way one kept following me like he was waiting for something. It just didn't sit right. There was nothing about it that seemed innocent. And what made it worse was that this center wasn't in the safest part of the city. People knew it had its share of weirdos. One of the managers I worked with had even been chased to her car not long before this happened. After that, we all started leaving together at night, waiting for each other before heading to the parking deck. I think we all quietly knew something wasn't right after that shift. To this day, I can't tell you what that guy's plan was. Maybe he didn't expect me to keep going all the way up. Maybe he assumed I'd stop at a lower level and he'd have a chance to. I don't know. I really don't want to know. All I know is I listened to that tight, crawling feeling in my chest and got the hell out of there. I never really knew what it meant to be comforted as a kid. The house I grew up in was run like a rule book, strict expectations, no room for softness. My parents weren't mean in the traditional sense, but warmth just wasn't something they handed out. You didn't get hugs after a hard day or praise when you brought home a certificate from school. You were expected to keep your head down and not need anything. I learned early to keep my emotions tucked away. I'd spend time alone in my room, pretending my stuffed animals could hug back, or wrap myself in old jackets just to feel something close to affection. At school, I was quiet. Being tall made me stick out, but I did everything I could to blend in. I didn't speak up much, not because I didn't have thoughts, but because I'd been taught not to cause trouble. Even when other kids picked on me, I kept my mouth shut. One year, a new student transferred in. He was older than the rest of us, supposedly homeschooled before. Everyone liked him right away. He was confident, smooth-talking, and always surrounded by classmates. I kept my distance, but eventually he started talking to me too. At first, it felt like something good was finally happening. He'd compliment me in this weirdly specific way, say the color of my shirt reminded him of flowers, or that I had a kind face. And since I never really got kindness from anyone else, I soaked it up. He asked me to be his girlfriend, and I said yes, not really knowing what that even meant at the time. For me, it was just holding hands during recess and maybe sitting together at lunch. But pretty quickly I noticed that he wanted more than that. Not in any obvious or dramatic way, but in how he talked to me, or the way he'd touch my arm and then act like it was no big deal when I flinched. When I said I didn't like something, he'd act hurt. He'd say I didn't care about him, or threaten to tell the teachers I did something I didn't. That part really scared me. I knew if anything came home to my parents, I'd be the one in trouble, not him. So I stayed quiet and let things slide. And every time I did, a little piece of me felt smaller. There was one day that stuck with me more than the rest. We were in class, and we sat near each other at one of those group tables. During a test, he dropped his pencil and ducked under the desk to get it, but he stayed there longer than he should have. I froze, unsure what was happening, just wanting it to be over. When he came back up, he acted like nothing happened. I didn't say a word, just kept my eyes on the clock until the day ended. After that, I stopped speaking much at all. My friends noticed, but no one really asked questions. At school, we had this big cultural project where each class got a country to represent. Ours was Russia. Parents helped decorate the classroom, and my mom actually volunteered, so I went with her, just happy to get out of the house. There were these little carnival tents set up in the hallway. I slipped into one of them to get away for a few minutes. It was quiet and oddly peaceful, until I saw the shadow outside the fabric. He followed me in, zipped it closed behind him, and tried to talk like everything was fine. Said he missed me, and wanted to be close again. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to believe him, and another part of me wanted to disappear. When I didn't react the way he expected, he got pushy. Not physically violent, but cornering, emotionally pressing. I panicked. I told him no and tried to leave, but he grabbed my wrist, tight. I still remember the way my skin stung afterward. Somehow, I managed to break away. I ran straight to the bathroom and locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking, and I just sat there, trying to breathe until it felt safe to come out. After that day, I barely looked him in the eye. A few weeks later, he transferred to another school. I thought I was finally free of that whole mess. Years later, I heard he might be moving to the same high school I was in. The old fear came back fast, but it wasn't the same as before. I was older now, more aware, and after everything I'd been through, I wasn't going to let someone like that hurt me again. I'd started therapy, opened up about things I never thought I'd say out loud. It helped. I wasn't completely healed, but I was learning how to carry my past without letting it crush me. I grew up in this quiet lake town where most houses were only used during the summer. Ours was one of maybe 4 that had people living in it year-round, so the neighborhood felt kind of deserted once school was back in session and the leaves started to turn. You got used to knowing exactly who lived where, what car they drove, and when they were supposed to be around. By the time I was 8, I had that place memorized like the back of my hand. There wasn't much to do in the fall, so I'd usually come home from school, drop my bag in the yard, and shoot hoops in the street until the sun dipped behind the hills. That afternoon, I was out there alone. My siblings were off doing something with their friends, and my mom had her usual spot at the kitchen table with her laptop. She saw me get off the bus and gave me a quick wave before disappearing back inside. Everything felt normal. The ball echoed down the road with each bounce, and I remember the air smelled like dry leaves and lake water. Then a car rolled into the street that didn't belong. I didn't recognize it, and more importantly, I didn't recognize the driver. Around here, people didn't just drive through without a reason. Most of the homes were empty for the season, and the ones that weren't, well, you knew every face by name. Still, I figured maybe he was lost or turning around after getting a glimpse of the water. Our house was the first one after the bend, so people sometimes used our driveway to flip around. He pulled up, slowed down, and rolled his window down. I was still holding the ball, just kind of standing off to the side of the road. He was maybe in his early 30s, dressed like he'd just come from a backyard party. Short sleeves, sunglasses on his head, tan like he'd spent the whole summer outside. He smiled and said something like, "Let me try a shot." I tossed him the ball without thinking. He missed, laughed, and asked me to grab it so he could try again. I ran to get it. When I stood up, I heard a faint click. It was subtle, but unmistakable. He'd taken a picture of me. I paused for a second, unsure of what to think, but brushed it off because he acted so casual. When I brought the ball back, his whole demeanor shifted. He grabbed my wrist, firm, not playful. The ball hit the pavement and rolled away. He didn't say anything right away, just stared like he was trying to decide something. Then he leaned forward, and in this low, serious voice, said not to yell, said no one would hear me. For a second, I froze. I knew my mom was home, just a few feet away, but I couldn't move. He started to drive forward while still holding onto my arm, like trying to walk me alongside the car. That jolted me out of whatever trance I was in. I yelled, loud, louder than I ever had. He let go instantly, cursed under his breath, and slammed the gas. Tires screeched, and I watched as he clipped the neighbor's yard, flying out of the street like he couldn't get away fast enough. My mom came running out and saw him disappear around the corner, but it was too late to get the plate number. Inside, I told her everything, and when my dad got home, we went over it all again. He knew the local police from his volunteer EMT work, so he called it in. Nothing ever came of it. No similar reports, no matching vehicle descriptions in nearby towns. But my mom mentioned she'd seen a strange car on our street a few times that week, just slowly driving by, never stopping. We figured he'd been watching, waiting for the right moment. Our house was clearly lived in, But with everyone gone during the day and the neighborhood mostly empty, it probably seemed like an easy target. That night, I was supposed to share my room with my brothers, but they stayed over at friends' houses. My parents thought it was probably safer that way, fewer kids under one roof. My dad brought the living room TV into my room to keep me distracted, and they closed the curtains, even though we didn't usually bother in the fall. It was close to 1 a.m. when I heard a knock at the window behind me. I was mid-episode, watching something on Adult Swim, and froze when I heard it. My first thought was maybe one of my brothers snuck back late and needed to be let in. But I didn't take chances, not after what happened earlier. I turned on every light in the hallway as I went to my parents' room and woke my mom up. She was groggy, squinting at the brightness, so I flipped the light off. That's when we saw someone standing outside their window, peering in. My mom screamed, and that finally got my dad up. The guy outside, same man from earlier, just stood there and muttered. I just wanted to hold his hand. My dad grabbed a baseball bat and ran outside in nothing but boxers, but by then, the man had already taken off into the woods. We called the cops again. Nothing came of it. But after that, we got a basic home security set up, and my parents made sure we always had someone around after school. Our neighbors were on high alert too. I don't know what happened to that man, whether he left town, got scared off, or just moved on. But he never came back. I was 18 at the time, working at a gas station just outside town in this quiet, sleepy southern suburb where nothing exciting ever really happened. Most nights were dead silent, and my boss usually only scheduled the guys for the overnight shifts. But one night, I asked if I could take a late one for a bit of extra cash. The store was only a few blocks from my house, and I figured it wouldn't be any different from the earlier shifts I was used to. It got dark fast that time of year, and the streets near the station had barely any lighting, so by the time I was halfway into my shift, everything outside the store windows looked pitch black. The beginning of my shift went just like always. I wiped down the counters, swept the floors more times than necessary, restocked some candy and cigarettes, then mostly leaned on the counter scrolling through my phone while waiting for the occasional customer. It was calm, boring even. That didn't last. A guy walked in, tall, probably in his mid-30s, looked kind of scruffy like he hadn't shaved or slept in a while. I gave him the usual, "Hey, how's it going?" and he just stared at me for a second before asking where the restroom was. I pointed toward the hallway past the counter, and he disappeared down there. I assumed he'd be in and out like everyone else, and after a few minutes, I totally forgot he was even there. Then one of my regulars came by, a big guy who used to be a Marine. We chatted for a while, just passing time. But during our conversation, we both heard something crash in the back, like a broom fell over or something heavy slid off a shelf. My regular paused and asked if I was working alone. I told him I was, and he offered to check it out. I appreciated it, but I didn't want to get chewed out for letting someone into the staff area, so I politely said no. He left not long after that, and I kept the conversation in the back of my mind as I continued on. Maybe half an hour later, I needed to use the bathroom myself. As I walked toward the hallway, I noticed the office door was cracked open much wider than I remembered leaving it. Something about it gave me this strange feeling, like I wasn't alone back there. So I nudged the door open with my foot to turn on the motion light inside. At first, nothing happened. But once the light flicked on, I saw him, that guy, standing completely still behind the open door, as if he'd been waiting there, not moving, long enough for the light to go off on its own. We locked eyes, and I immediately took a step back. My heart was pounding, and I knew I didn't want to stick around to find out what he was planning. He stepped out a moment later, calm as ever, and just walked out the front door without saying anything, not even looking away until he was out of sight. I called my manager right away. She called the police, and it turns out that same guy had been banned from a bunch of nearby stores for sneaking around in the back areas. But because he hadn't technically done anything illegal, he'd always gotten away with it. After that night, he started showing up more often, just wandering in, standing silently near the back of the store, and watching me from behind the aisles. Never buying anything, never talking, just there. I never did figure out what his intentions were, and honestly, I don't think I want to know. But the thought that he stayed still long enough in that dark room to let the motion sensor turn off, that stuck with me more than anything else. Like he was waiting for the perfect moment to do something. Back when I was 25, I had this job working the early shift at a small dessert spot tucked into a quiet corner of the city. The place barely got any traffic in the mornings, so most days I opened up and ran the counter alone until things picked up in the afternoon. It was peaceful for the most part, which I honestly didn't mind. It gave me a chance to just sip coffee and let the day start slow. But one morning, something happened that stayed with me longer than I expected. A man walked in not long after I opened. I recognized him instantly. He'd been in the night before with what looked like his wife and adult kids. He'd barely spoken to me then, just the usual pleasantries while they grabbed a few things to go. So when he came back in by himself and struck up a conversation, I thought he was just being friendly at first. He started asking me questions, like how old I was, if I was in school, if I was happy with the job, and casually kept saying I looked way younger than 25, like 19 tops. It was strange, but I brushed it off. Then he brought up this job opportunity. Said he could hook me up with a place that paid $7 more an hour than I was making, that it was an easy gig, and that he was sure I'd be hired immediately. Naturally, I got curious. I wasn't tied to the dessert shop, and a raise like that sounded life-changing. I asked for the company name, but instead of answering, he just rambled on about how great the job was and how many people he knew there. He kept dodging the actual name and started going on tangents about how he's had multiple affairs, how his wife supposedly knows and doesn't care, and how he once helped a 19-year-old girl get on her feet. Said she still thanks him for it, whatever that meant. At that point, my stomach kind of turned. The conversation had shifted from friendly to something way more uncomfortable, and I started picking up on little things that made the whole interaction feel layered with pressure. He kept telling me to come check out the job right after my shift, wouldn't take a no thanks, and just vaguely mentioned it was on the edge of the city. Again, never actually naming the company. I told him I didn't have a car that day, which was true. My sister was going to pick me up. I figured that'd be enough to shut it down, but instead, he leaned in harder and told me I should just ride with him. Said it would look better if I showed up with him, that they'd hire me on the spot just because he was vouching for me. At one point during this weird pitch, he pulled out this random folded piece of paper and told me it was proof that he was licensed to carry a weapon. He flashed it like it was supposed to impress me or make me feel safer, but it just made my skin crawl. Then finally, after dancing around it forever, he gave me the name of the company. I said okay, and told him to come back around closing to pick me up, just to get him to leave. As soon as he walked out the door, I ran to the back and started Googling the name he gave me. Nothing came up. I searched the area he mentioned, thinking maybe I'd find a warehouse or some kind of industrial building out that way. But it was just empty fields and scattered roads. No businesses, no job, nothing. When it came time to clock out, my sister pulled around to the side like we planned, and sure enough, that man was parked a short distance away, waiting. He never approached, never followed, just sat there in his car as we drove off. That was the last time I ever saw him. Looking back now, I regret not reporting it. At the time, I had a hard time processing situations like that. I tended to freeze or play along out of fear, and I wasn't as aware as I am now of how serious that could have been. I still think about what might have happened if I'd gone with him. I just hope no one else ever did.